Flakes of snow drifted from the evening sky. A stretch of thin clouds swirling in a grayish-dark, amorphous blob over the lone cruiser as it speeds down the desolate highway. A gentle, musty scent of wet earth wafts across the cabin through the rolled-down window from the driver as Cooper sat in the back seat of the car, glancing out the water-speckled windows at the dark forest across the road. Dense wooded trees passing by so quickly, they seemed to merge into one as the vehicle picked up on its speed. The sun beats down on the horizon, parting the already sparse clouds. The snow had ceased to fall, remnants of it crusting the edges of the asphalt in dirt-laced piles. The handcuffs were painfully cutting into his wrists. It noisily clinked as he shifted uneasily in the back seat, his butt already starting to become sore from the long drive. The driver makes a split second of eye contact with Cooper in the rearview mirror, which was just enough to spark a conversation that pierces the tension of the silence. "I assume you didn't do it then," the driver remarks, his gaze shifting back onto the empty road. He was a stout man, likely already in his late 30s. He carried a hint of a southern accent in his voice, eye bags, a scraggly beard, and a pair of aviators sitting on top of his hair hinted that the officer had likely dealt inexperienced with young punks like him before. "Does it really matter?" Cooper asked, peering back out into the trees. "Nah, not much. You know, I've driven a lot of people like you down to this prison before. God knows how many. Usually I would have gotten the 'I didn't do it' catchphrase by now." "And what would you say?" "And I say, yep, I know you didn't." The man lets out a slight chuckle as he readjusted the rearview mirror, likely not the first time that he had joked on the same subject before. The radio on the dashboard chatters to life as a shrill, static-filled female voice fills the cabin. "Dispatch to all available units. Be advised, 1091E near the Perkins Street exit of 285. All units are to keep a lookout for a 91V in the area." The officer blinks, reaching in and producing a pack of Marlboro from his breast pocket. He flicks the lighter as he draws in a lungful, exhaling out the window as he shot a glance at Cooper through the metal bars that separated both men. "Cigarette?" "I don't smoke." "Suit yourself." He stuffs the box back into his pocket as he readjusted his seat. His partner sitting adjacent yawns and stretches as he rubs his hands over his clean-shaven face, still half awake. His legs are rested on the dashboard. His body leans back in the passenger seat, with his hat over the top of his eyes, visor-like. And Cooper glanced at both their name tags in the rearview. Driver was Storage, his partner Merlin. "Any of that on the radio seemed to be of interest?" Cooper asked absentmindedly. "Well, all of it, but that junk box never shuts the heck up. You pay too much attention to it in this seat and you're going to drive yourself crazy." Stock replied, smirking. "All officers are available for incoming 21. He shuts off the radio as the car plunges into silence. "I followed your case a little, being a Macon and all," Stock remarks, waving his hands at a handful of files poking out in the glove compartment. "You're from Macon yourself?" Cooper asks incredulously. The officer turns his head to face Cooper, engrossed in the moment. "Yep. And came to Atlanta in the 90s to become a city cop. Always wanted to be one, working a murder case like that senatorial mess you got yourself mixed up in. Real shame, though. Look out on the road." Cooper jolted forward in his seat, his head recoiling in the process. A colossal tree teeters and crashes onto the road ahead of the car, its branches swaying violently from the inertia. Everything happened all at once, faster than Cooper the officers could comprehend. "Oh crap!" The cruiser swerved sharply, the tires screeching in protest as it narrowly missed the tree. Its inhabitants thrown onto the sides of the door as it screeched away from the road down a steep hill incline into the adjacent forest. Bushes, pebbles, and tree branches collided with the windscreen of the vehicle, small cracks forming at its edges. The vehicle overturned on its sides numerous times as it careened further down the hill before finally coming to a halt in a muddy ditch. Hacking coughs, pained groans, and the deflation of airbags were the only audible sounds within the upside-down cruiser. Cooper woke up lying on the roof interior of the car, a scream of pain coming up from the passenger side as Cooper glanced at Merlin, who was still buckled into his seat. Cooper felt a rush of blood to his head as he began feeling dizzy, his hands still in chains behind his back. My leg, man, I'm bleeding." As Cooper regained his bearings, he peered more closely at Merlin, and to his shock, he realized that the man had his left leg in all the wrong direction. He had sworn that he saw a splintered bone jutting out of the skin, but the man moved his legs out of sight before Cooper could be sure. "Dang it, Merlin. How many times do I have to remind you not to put your dang legs onto the dashboard?" Stork yelled as he unbuckled his own seatbelt, causing him to fall onto the roof with a thud. "Don't move, I'm gonna get the kid out of the trunk." Stork groaned as he crawled out of the window of the door, getting on his feet as he stumbled to the back. Cooper heard the pop of the trunk opening as he heard equipment and toolkits spilling onto the forest ground. Steps could be heard rounding the car to the other side of the passenger seat as Stock unbuckled his partner and firmly pulled him out of the car, laying him on the ground. He was still breathing heavily as he craned his face to survey his own legs, which was now pooling a good amount of crimson red liquid into the earth. "Oh crap, oh no." Merlin whimpered as he clutched his legs, his breathing straining from the immense pain. "All right, breathe. Remember your training, you can do this." Stork said as he unzipped the kit and took out a handful of medical equipment. "How do I remember my training if I'm the one bleeding out to death on the ground?" Merlin cried as he painfully writhed. "Quit being a baby, you're gonna be fine." And I was reciting to myself for crying out loud. Stork snapped as he applied pressure to the wound with his bandage, with Merlin's screams echoing all throughout the forest. The breeze of the forest swept through the tree lines, stirring dry leaves and twigs to fall onto the forest floor. Stork dragged Merlin to a nearby tree, gently laying him against the trunk. Merlin was still breathing, but his breaths were shallow and quick. His leg is wrapped in duct tape, a belt, and a splint that seems to hold together relatively well. Although it may not look like much, it did certainly prove to be helpful in stopping the blood. Cooper was still cuffed in the back seat of the car when Stork rapped on the windows. "Hey kid, you stay in there. Don't move and don't try anything stupid while I go get help." The officer walked over to the front as he reached in and pulled out a radio transceiver from the car, holding the device to his lips before clicking on a button. The device booted to life as it started to sizzle and crackle. "Yeah, this is Zulu 277 to dispatch, repeat. Zulu 277 to dispatch. How copy, over." Stork reinstated his phrase with more vigor added to the last word. "This is Zulu 277 to dispatch. How copy, over." Zulu 277 requesting for a 129. We've got injured personnel. We need immediate backup, over. Still no game. Was the radio damaged? Stork gave the box a couple of light slaps as he attempted communications. After a minute of trying, he gave up, walking around the car as he attempted to assess the damage. The car was totaled with the hood as an unrecognizable twisted metal. He marched over to Merlin, who was now relatively alert, still clutching onto his leg. "Merlin, I'm gonna go check on the highway to see if we can call for help. Stay here and keep an eye on that fella in the car. If he does anything stupid, you call me back." "Got it, will do." Merlin eyed Cooper, who was still sitting in the car, his death stare unwavering as he looked back at the two officers. He gestured to the walkie-talkie holstered on his belt as he started to hike up back where the vehicle came from, following the trail of tire marks in the flattened grass. A couple of minutes later, Stork reached a point in the incline where it had started to gradually level out, He looked around as he scratched his head. This shouldn't be right. He continued following the tracks until it had suddenly ended abruptly in a patch of grass. He stood there for a second pondering where the highway should have been, when his thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the radio crackling to life. A desperate plea called out from within, as a blanket of heavy static shrouded most of the voice.
Stock, need help, something coming.
Silence ensued, followed by cracks of deafening gunfire in the distance. The sound came as soon as it went, which sent Stock into a frenzied running back to the car. As soon as he had reached the site, he froze in his tracks, heart beating loudly in his chest. He could still feel adrenaline surging through his veins, his hands having a slight tremor. His partner was nowhere to be seen at the tree, leave for a couple of empty bullet casings on the ground where he should have been. He slowly approached the car with caution and peered inside the window when, to his surprise, Cooper was still inside. However, shaken up and shivering, crawled up into an unresponsive fetal position. "Hey, talk to me. What happened to the other officer?" He unholstered the service weapon from his belt as he shone the flashlight around the forest, which was starting to dim from sundown. The beam of light was powerful, but it was soon overpowered and engulfed in the darkness of the void. He rounded the car towards the tree where Merlin sat, pistol at the ready. Was it a cougar or mountain lion? The radio previously did mention of an animal attack, and he wasn't taking any chances. "Merlin, Merlin, can you hear me?" He shouted, but no answer came. And then it struck him, his blood running cold. There were no sounds of the forest when they came in. No birds and no insects, no passing cars. Either they're alone or they're not alone. Both thoughts are equally terrifying for the mind to comprehend. He hastily made his way over to the ground where Merlin was last seen and examined the area. Matted grass, but it seemed to end there. No signs of a struggle or a drag. The only evidence that Merlin existed was the empty casings which were on the ground. The empty casings on the ground. What in the St. Mary? Stock stared in horror as these shells slowly one by one started to sink and disappear into the forest as if it was taunting him, calling out to him. His feet were frozen to the ground, although his mind was screaming for every inch of his body to run. Suddenly, he snapped out of the trance and came to his senses, however realizing that his feet were starting to sink into the ground as well. This wasn't quicksand. The ground was eating him alive. He could feel the sting of corrosiveness eating into his rubber boots as he struggled to free himself. He watched desperately at Cooper, who was staring at him with horror behind the window as he sank further and further down, the ground reaching up to his heels. No, this was not how he was going to die, not like this, not in the middle of this forsaken forest. He hastily untied his shoes as he pulled one foot free from the sinking boot, doing the same for the other. Stepping unsteadily on the boots, he leapt with all his might at the area that he assumed to be safe as he landed on his chest, knocking the wind out of his lungs. He caught a spare second of solace just as the muffled screams of Cooper resonated from the car, catching his attention. The man seems to be shouting and gesturing at something, but the sound was muddy and distant. He could barely make out the words from the shape of his mouth. "Behind you!" The officer whipped around as he saw a large tendril of a vine from the tree meters behind him steadily creeping up for an ambush. As it seemingly knew that its presence was exposed, it shot at inhuman speeds towards Stock, reaching the man before he had time to react. The vine pierced at his chest, instantly crumpling the man to the ground. The officer laid motionless as Cooper screamed in panic, the tendril working its way towards the prisoner trapped in the walls of a vehicle. He desperately worked at the handles of the door, but to no avail, before hitting his fist against the glass. The vine prodded at the peculiar shape of the enigmatic structure as it applied pressure to the glass, webs of cracks forming at the window. The prisoner screamed, closing his eyes as the glass shatters, just as the loud cracks of gunfire erupted from behind the vine. Cooper slowly opened his eyes to see the officer standing over a pile of ropey, motionless vines, the man slowly limping over to the car. Stock grunted and coughed as he unzipped his jacket and took it off, exposing an underside plate carrier that was considerably dented and damaged by the impact of the strike. The vine was dead for sure, as the officer fired another round into the rope for safe measures. "Thanks for helping me back there. That was some scary supernatural stuff," Cooper muttered as he peered over at the tendril. "Well, it isn't so supernatural anymore, is it?" Stock popped the side door of the car open. "Would you tell me now what the heck happened to my partner?" Cooper froze up as he recalled the previous scene in his head. He was jolted back to reality by the cop impatiently, snapping his fingers in front of his face, signaling for an answer. The vines. The earth took him like they almost took you, but he wasn't so lucky. When he sank halfway down, the vines from the trees reached down and grabbed onto him. I thought that they were helping him at first, and then he started to stretch." The prisoner stretched his arms wide before uttering a pop sound with his mouth. The officer gagged as the prisoner pointed him to the upper portion of Merlin's body, which was hanging in the tree line. Tendrils of vines coiled around the man's torso, his intestines hanging out for all to see. The face of Merlin was covered by the vines, but Cooper could imagine the look of terror on the police officer's face during these last moments, etched into a paralytic, frozen state. "This whole forest, it's cursed," Cooper continued. "The road back was gone, is it not?" "How did you know?" the officer inquired, taken aback. "I was looking at the GPS on the dashboard when you left. The road was still there for a second, then it was gone, poof. No static, nothing. Just suddenly replaced by all forest. You think that we're somewhere else?" "Don't be crazy now. It's probably just the system acting up or something. Also, I need you to turn around." The prisoner was perplexed at the strange order that the officer gave, but complied and turned. A moment later, he felt his hands relax as a clinking sound of handcuffs could be heard dropping onto the ground. Stock handed Cooper a walkie-talkie. He looked at the prisoner expectantly, as Cooper hesitated before grabbing the device. "What is it for?" Cooper exclaimed. "Well, in case we accidentally split up. Press and hold this button here and talk into the microphone. I know you wouldn't run away since we're all stuck in this cursed place," the officer replied, striding to the back of the trunk. He searched the equipment laying on the ground until he finally found what he needed. He reached down and grabbed onto the shotgun, checking its ammunition count before checking its safety. A Mossberg, perfect for crowd control, used widely in law enforcement and peacekeeping. The officer slung the firearm over his back as he grabbed onto a flashlight and a curious-looking gun, its body all red. "Here, catch this. We need to take all the crap that we can carry before we leave." He tossed the items over to Cooper, who had managed to catch the flashlight but missed the gun. "Bad throw," Cooper remarked. "Hey, don't judge me." Cooper pocketed the torch into his pants and he examined the gun. "Are you sure that we really need to use this? I don't see any reason to use this flare gun unless we were trying to light the whole forest on fire." Either that Stock ignored the directed remarks or he hadn't paid any attention to the prisoner, as he continued to stuff essentials into a black duffel bag without a reply. A couple of minutes later, they were set to depart. The sun had already disappeared below the trees, shrouding the forest in a gloomy black silhouette. "I've drove across this highway for God knows how many times to prison, which I'm certain that I should know our approximate bearings. From what I can recall, I think there should be a fire lookout tower a few clicks away from our position." "How can you be so sure? Have you seen the tower before?" "It's been on this road around since forever. It's always sticking out of the tree lines like a sore thumb. You have to be blind and not catch it earlier." "Well, whatever you say, Chief, you think that it's inhabited." "Do I look like freaking Santa Claus to you? Heck if I know." Stark grunted dismissively, signaling the end of the conversation. The rest of the trek was relatively uneventful, except for the occasional cracks of twigs and branches falling, which had always sent the duo into a panicked alert. "It should be around here somewhere," the officer muttered to himself, straining his eyes at the trees. Although he still could not be sure of the tower, he had a sudden chill down his spine as the forest suddenly came alive with the ambient calls of wildlife. Streaks of the forest resonated around the pair as a guttural, raspy, harsh scream stood out to the clearing to their left. They froze in their tracks as they stared at the source of the noise. Stock's hands were trembling the most, shotgun trained towards the dense shrubbery. Nobody made a peep, anticipating an attack. Nothing moved. A black figure burst out of the bush, its wings flapping chaotically as it nearly collided into the face of Cooper. The forest was momentarily lit alight with a dazzling spectacle of orange, white, and red as the muzzle of the shotgun exploded, gray smoke and ember particles blossoming in all directions. The officer racked the shotgun as he aimed. "Son of a... what the..." Cooper hissed as he stumbled around, dazed. The officer continued to train the shotgun at the figure, his iron sights laid onto the bird as it flew away into trees and disappeared out of sight. "That's a call of the barn owl. We must keep moving. The sound will attract unwanted attention." "Oh, so are we just going to ignore the fact that you almost shot into my face? I'm calling my lawyer Saul when we're out of this mess," Cooper exclaimed, jabbing an accusatory finger at Stock. "Well, that's generous. A thank you gesture for me not hesitating in saving your dang life. Would you have wanted me to check out the attacker before firing? You would have been dead by then." Stock fired back with an angry glare. "Let's get moving now. Save this unnecessary bickering for later." He trooped forward into the forest, leaving little time for Cooper to argue. He hurried after the officer as specks of white started to fall into the forest floor. Soon it covered in a layer of white as the snow grew thicker and thicker. "Where's the dang tower?" Cooper waved around his torch, the beam of light melting away the darkness of the trail. The sounds of the chirps of crickets and birds grew louder as the flakes fell heavier by the minute. "I don't know. I can't even hear myself think over this commotion," the officer shouted, looking around in desperation. "Over there, I think I can see it," Cooper yelled, shining his light at a structure in the distance. It stood tall, supported by extended poles which carried it high up into the skies. It was stretched above the towering treetops, dwarfing even the highest trees in the forest. The outpost, it seemed intact, except there were no light coming from its cabin. That was the least of the duo's concern though, as the ongoing snowstorm had started to slightly hinder their movements. Cooper looked away from the tower for a second as the screeches of the forest was now deafening to the ears, his eyes suddenly catching fast movements within the trees. He swore that he was seeing things. However, his greatest fears were confirmed when he saw a face peeking out from behind the trees, dozens of yards away. It was unsettling to say the least. The face had no facial description. It was just a smiling face, an exact replica of the smiley emoji, except it had a contrast of black and white. Its eyes were lifeless void of black, and its mouth was twisted into a sickening smile. It was looking at them motionless, as if it was deciding prey from a predator. Cooper stepped backwards before tripping and stumbling over an exposed root. He fell onto his butt, a sharp pain of impact jolting up his body. He stumbled up to his feet as he looked back at the figure, but it was gone. "Stock!" he yelled, running after the officer who was a few yards ahead of him nearing the tower. "It's coming!" The officer turned with a puzzled look on his face, upon glancing at the man standing in front of him, disheveled and looking like a total psycho. "What happened?" he asked, straining his ears. "You've got to speak louder, kiddo. Can't hear you." "There's a dang monster out there and I think it's coming for us." "A what?" "A monster. It's coming for us." The officer's blood ran cold upon hearing those words. He peeked over the shoulder of Cooper as he surveyed the forest behind them. He couldn't see anything through the snowstorm. However, he was not sticking around to find out if what the man had said was true. Go, book it to the tower, double time. The pair jogged through the heavy snow as the screams of the forest merged with the increasing howls of the wind and storm, a resulting concoction of symphony that shakes the nerves of even the most hardened war veteran. We're almost there. They passed a metal sign as they ran. No trespassing. As they reached the base of the tower, the path abruptly ended at a metal ladder which reached up into the cabin of the structure. Go, you climb first. I'll keep an eye out on the forest. The officer ushered him to the ladder, as Cooper grabbed into a rung and started to climb. Every rung that he held onto it felt like grabbing at knives, the cold cutting into his very essence. His hands felt numb as his fingers became stiff, the tingle of chill running up his whole body. His palms are sweaty, knees weak, and arms are heavy. There isn't any vomit yet, but he sure had felt like throwing up. The storm is still in full swing as he reached the end of the ladder. He pushed at the hatch which led into the cabin, but realized that it seemed to be stuck from the inside. I can't open it. What did you say? The voice of the officer was carried up with the howl of the wind. I said I can't open it. He cupped one hand to his mouth and shouted, Try barging it, we've got little time left. The officer shouted back as he saw a looming, emaciated figure step out of the tree line. It was easily 12 feet high. The figure hunched over as it strided toward the tower. Cooper continued pushing at the hatch as the creature advanced closer. He heard the crack of the shotgun below him as he pushed harder, throwing his body up towards the hatch. Finally, the hatch gave way as it swung open inwards with a bang. The overturned chair that had been resting on it is pushed to one side as the man climbed up into the hatch. Hey, up here, it's open. He shouted down as the officer hastily started climbing up the rungs. The creature was approaching fast, closing the distance between the tower and itself. It let out an inhuman shriek as it started to dash towards the officer. Hurry up, it's coming, Cooper yelled as he stared in horror at its elongated, grotesque body. The creature reached the base of the tower as it stretched its bony hands out to grab the officer, who was already halfway up the ladder. He cried out as it dug into his leg, shredding the fabric and creating a fresh wound. It wrapped its hands around one leg of the officer as it attempted to drag him down. Do something, help me for Christ's sake, Stonk screamed, his grip loosening. Cooper wagged his head for ideas until something came to mind, the flare. He unholstered the gun from his pocket as he aimed carefully at the figure, taking caution not to miss. He had one chance. As the officer wildly trashed about, Cooper prepared to line up on a clear shot. Time slowed down as everything came to a standstill. The barrel erupted into flames as a blinding reddish-white projectile shot out of the gun, its trajectory lined into the smile of the monstrosity. It hits the target square in the face, sending out a brilliant firework of sparks and particles as it bounced off. The creature hissed as it cowered and covered its face, the sudden dazzling light stunning it for a second. It screams as it's let go of the officer, retreating back into the woods. Both Stock and Cooper were sitting in the cabin, recovering from the previous events. Nobody said a word as the storm wailed outside. An old antique sofa was pushed over the hatch as a form of barricade. It was a long day. As Stock patched himself up, Cooper looked around their surroundings. It was apparent that no one was in the tower for a while as the furniture and floors were covered with a thin layer of dust. Stock took out a pack of cigarettes and patted around for his lighter. He attempted to light with his shaking hands, not before doing so with some extent of difficulty. As Cooper glanced at the desk, he saw the outline of a huge box, its features covered under a dusty curtain. Throwing the curtain off, a shiny metal radio transmitter stared back at him. He looked at the numerous buttons and switches that lined the transmitter as his eyes fell upon one labeled Power. He pressed the button once. Click. The transmitter laid still, dead as ever. He tried again with the other buttons, but the transmitter gave the same result. Are we seriously stuck here? Are there no other towers? He shouted in frustration, kicking one of the legs of the desk. The desk toppled over as the leg splintered, causing the items on it to spill over. One of a black wire leading to the transmitter caught Stock's eye as he signaled to Cooper. Hey, check that wire out. There might be a power supply source nearby. Cooper looks at the wire as he follows its winding directions leading into a cabinet. It swung open on its hinges, revealing an ancient fuse box. Cooper cautiously flicked the switch as one of the light bulbs in the cabin suddenly flickered to life, the orange glow basking the room in a warm, enticing lighting. Suddenly, the radio flickered to life as a string of white noise came from the speakers. Cooper hurried over to the transmitter, setting it upright on the level floor as he attempted to tune the stereo, jumping from channel to channel.
Ranger service for Northbound County.
Cooper returned and brought the microphone to his lips as he held the button, attempting to establish contact.
Hello? Is anyone there? Hello, please, say something if you're out there. Please, we need help. Over. Over.
He pleaded, agitation and frustration explicit in his voice. The radio went silent for a moment before starting up with a static, heavy-filled male voice.
Hello? Oh, thank God, we need help, please. Hello, is someone trying to contact us? This is the Park Ranger Service for Northbound County. We're not getting your signal very well. Please speak slowly and clearly. Please, please, please help, God. We're stuck up here in the fire tower in Northbound Forest, and there's a thing coming.
The radio cuts him off.
If you can hear this, please repeat your message, as I am unable to understand what you're saying. Hello, can you please identify yourself? Over. Oh my God, okay. Okay. My name is Cooper. Hello, hello.
He fumbled with the stereo until the same voice came through the radio again.
You're not coming through clearly. Please repeat. Over. Oh God, please. My God, we're going to die up here. There's a thing coming after to get us. Don't you understand?
A spotlight affixed to the tower was suddenly triggered and turned on with a loud clank. Something triggered the motion sensor, probably a deer. Stock said as he limped over to one of the windows and peered out.
I read you, sir. Please do not leave your position. We will send a helicopter to get you as soon as the storm had subsided. Over.
Cooper breathed a sigh of relief as soon as he heard the words. However, he sprang back to the radio.
Wait, how long? Dawn, at the earliest.
The hatch suddenly resonated with a series of loud thuds, the wood creaking as it shuddered. Something on the other side was trying to get in. Stock, Cooper. A shaky voice floated from the hatch. Wait, is that Merlin? Stock looked at the hatch as it continued to shudder, however, it was not budging under the weight of the sofa. Stock, let me in. I'm so hungry, please. Merlin, is that you son of a... Hang on, I'm coming. Stock limped over to the sofa, attempting to push it off the hatch. No, Cooper yelled, sprinting forward, and grabbing the officer by the collar. Both fell to the floor, wrestling violently, as they attempted to gain the upper hand. Stock threw a blind punch towards Cooper as he tried to regain his footing. Stock, so hungry. The voice continued, rasping and unnatural. Stock, that's not Merlin. He's dead. You saw him in the trees. Cooper yelled, shoving the dazed officer to the floor. He's gone. Get a hold of yourself. Cooper continued, squaring the man up as he stood back on his feet. Both men were at either side of the room, the sofa and hatch in the middle. No, he's not. He's freezing out there. We need to let him in. Stock dashed at the sofa, attempting to ram it away from the hatch, and Cooper did the same. As both charged towards the furniture, arms ready to intercept the opposing party. They met in the middle as the sheer momentum sent Stock to the floor, and Cooper stumbling backwards into the broken desk. Everything was silent for a second as both men looked at the shotgun resting against the wall. They looked back at each other as they sprung at the weapon. Stock made it to the shotgun first, lifting the barrel up just as he was tackled by Cooper. The weapon disengaged with a deafening bang at the windows, the glass shattering into tiny pieces. Both men were stunned by the sudden noise, but Stock was the first to snap back. He elbowed Cooper in the jaw just as the man fell to the ground in pain, clutching his face with both hands. Weapon trained on Cooper. Stock eyed him with the barrel pointed at his head. "You wouldn't want to do this. It's for my partner," he growled, approaching the sofa with the gun still trained on the man. "Don't put the gun down. We can talk this through. It isn't your friend." "Just shut up," he yelled, spittle flying from the officer's mouth. "I've had enough of this. This isn't real, Cooper. That is Merlin, and he has come." He tore open the hatch as the man was greeted with a rush of cold air. Everything was quiet. Cooper laid on the floor as motionless as he could be. Stock smiled as he looked down through the hatch. "Come in, Merlin, we were just—" The officer was gone in an instant, snapped away by a blur of black through the hatch. The shotgun clattered to the floor noisily before coming to a rest. The shaky breathing of Cooper was the only audible noise within the room, as the storm had started to subside. He looked at the open hatch as he slowly crawled towards it, uncertain of what he would see below. Slowly peeking out, he was only greeted with a blast of chilly air. The officer was nowhere to be seen. He slinked back in as he slowly closed the hatch, pushing the sofa back on. In the distance, he could make out the morning sun rising over the horizon. Its rays stretched over the mountains and forests, exterminating the darkness of the shadows. Shortly after, the whir of a distant blade could be heard, as the man looked out the shattered window with a blank expression on his face. The helicopter landed shortly after beside the tower, its body painted in yellow and red. A team of rescuers piled out as they attempted to break into the hatch of the tower. The rest was a blur of events as Cooper was carried out on a stretcher into the helicopter. "I'm sorry this took so long. I've been typing on this all day now. My hands are aching. It is my testimony to what happened to the policeman. I will be handing a second copy over to the officers waiting in the adjacent interrogation room. Brother, if you're reading this, please put this story up for all to see. I didn't kill Merlin or Stock. The monster in the forest took them." It doesn't really help that I can still hear that melodic shriek in the back of my mind. I'm trying to get closure, but I can't seem to get any closer to putting the experience behind me as much as I tried. Sincerely, Cooper.